And we're live. Hey everybody, this is Christian Peverelli, and I'm here with Irma. She is the founder and CEO of Cafecito. Cafecito means little coffee in Spanish, and she's going to tell us all about her startup. She also is a real badass no-coder, and I really encourage you to go check out MeetCafecito.com. And Irma, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. I really appreciate being here, and I'm super excited to just dive in and talk about no code, remote work, and all the fun stuff of just putting your product out there and seeing what happens.
Love it. So let's start off by you just telling us a little bit about what Cafecito is.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely can do that. So Cafecito right now is a platform where you can essentially sign up and have a virtual coffee through your literal computer with another remote worker from anywhere in the world. So we actually started to launch locally, and we had to pivot that after COVID, surfaced. And so we've been mainly just doing virtual connections since March. And it's been a really great, challenge for me as a first-time founder, but also bringing people together is super important to me, especially in that space of remote work where we're kind of lacking a lot of those social opportunities, right? Working from home.
Absolutely. And I think you really touched on something interesting. Like, I've been an entrepreneur for 12 years. I've this remote work is not something new to me.
Yep.
But I think something that people don't realize that's happening throughout this is that there are pains that come from working from home. Yeah, it's true, guys. For everyone watching, it's great to be in pajamas for the first couple months, but after a while, you do start missing certain social interactions and interactions with people who are going through similar things that you are.
Exactly.
And so that's really what you're focused on, right? It's about creating these kind of meaningful online coffee times. So you were actually able to build this entire platform without writing a single line of code. So that's another thing that I wanted to kind of talk about. Of course, I'm the CEO of We Are No Code, so I'm definitely really excited about all this stuff. But I'd love to hear your story, how you got it. How did you feel the first time you started building with these no-code tools? I don't know, how did you get started?
Yeah, so I will say my background is in psychology. So I went to school for psychology. And then my last year of school, I taught myself front-end development, right? So that's how I got into tech. That's like a starting point for me, right? So after that, I think from there, I was able to, get into the know of what's happening in terms of startups and new products launching and all of that. And through that, I found out about no code. And I don't remember where I found out about it. It must have been Twitter. And I'm pretty sure it was MakerPad. I think they were called something else before MakerPad. But that was my first introduction into I think the first tool was Webflow. And so I remember just signing up for Webflow and it being not using code anymore, which was weird because I was trying to learn code at the time, but instead using just a UI to create this thing that you have in your head, and putting it on your browser, and essentially it taking you zero to little knowledge, knowing HTML, CSS, JavaScript, right? It was basic stuff, and that was my kind of start into just no code and all of that. I did drop Webflow. I love them, but at that time I think I was just focusing on other things. It just didn't end up becoming a Webflow expert. But through there, I just started exploring more tools. So Zapier was the next one that I started to look into. It's super easy to get set up. So it was automating, whether it's you have a form and you want that email or information to land, in your email, or hit your email, then go into a specific folder, whatever that automation is. It was just super, super easy to use. And so I just started exploring more and more tools to see what I essentially gravitated to. And I found for me right now, Card, so card.co, amazing platform, super affordable. For me, I don't have a ton of disposable income. So it was a really great platform for me to start off, just putting together a simple landing page. And that's essentially what I used to build a landing page for Cafecito. It was just what's something simple that I can get up running in a week. It won't take a ton of design skills or, figuring out how to make things interactive, but just putting up something static that at least can get the word out there as to this solution. And then from there, whether it be using Airtable to collect email addresses or using Airtable linked records, it's so powerful what you can do. And I think it's just a matter of exploring that, taking your idea and just figuring out what tools fit with your idea best is like what I would recommend and what I tried to do. It's obviously hard because it's like learning a new thing, but if you're just putting a little bit of time each day or every week even into learning a no-code tool, it can make a huge difference as to what you can produce and put out into the world.
Love it. And so I love that story because actually you started by learning how to do some basic coding.
Yeah.
And the reason why I love it is because there definitely is a stigma in no code where it's like, a lot of developers feel kind of threatened by no code because it's like, but one of the things that I always say is like, no code is really just another sort of development language. It's just much easier to learn. It's more visual. It frankly is just better lent to the average human, right? A human who is better at processing things visually, learning things visually, and so that's I think what I always try to encourage in our students is like even if you're a developer, you should learn some of these things because they can get you where you want to go quicker. And then if there are certain codes that you need to write sort of custom, then you should do that. Absolutely. It's really a means to an end. And I never tell people like stop coding because some people are just really great at coding already and they can get to that end through a different mean. And so that's what I find kind of exciting. So tell us like, what was that feeling when you first discovered like, wow, I can do something online, like, coming from a psychology background and being like, oh, wow, I can actually do this with no experience. How long did it take?
Yeah. So I'll kind of touch on the two pieces of it. So one was like me coming to that feeling of like, when I first learned how to code, it was like insane. I was like, I can literally write a little bit of syntax and like some styling, and then I have something show up on my browser, which they then can share with people and then get feedback on, right? So that was insane and blew my mind. But then when you get into no code, right, now you're stripping away knowing any technology. And now I was able to get to a place where I could just like put something together in like under an hour. So literally I would think of an idea and like go to my computer and start putting together a landing page and then be like, oh no, this is a really, really dumb idea. Like, why am I doing this right now? But like just going through that process of like putting your work into motion already puts you ahead of like so many other people. So for me, being able to do that was like super gratifying because in psychology, like I wanted to understand how people will react to this idea. Like, will they find this valuable? How will they use it? Like all these questions about user experience. And through no code, I'm able to do that pretty easily. It's just a matter of asking people for help and putting it in certain communities for them to give you feedback. So it was a happy feeling, a feeling of like, this is like really, really easy and it's like too easy. What am I doing wrong? But just like getting it out there was like a really, really gratifying for me.
What am I doing wrong? I love that. I love how you say that because that really is the sensation that everyone always has, right? They don't really talk about it, but it's like every time that you do something, you're like, what am I doing wrong here? This is actually easier than I expected. Or I think there's a lot of that, right?
Harder. Yeah.
I mean, you really nailed it. Like that thing of like getting started is probably the hardest thing. And so I think that that's a really empowering thing is when you're able to get started, but also get started quickly and very quickly go out there and test some of your ideas and figure out whether it's worth spending 2 years on and a lot of money. And that's something that I strongly encourage people to do in entrepreneurship. So you randomly fell into entrepreneurship then, right?
It was random. I think my whole life has been pretty random at this point. I didn't I'm in tech right now. It wasn't in the books. I wasn't like, I'm going to go after and do this thing in technology. I do product management as my day job. Also not a thing that I was like, I'm going to, figure out how to get into product and work with engineering teams. I think really like the psychology piece of like me wanting to understand how people think, how they make decisions. I think that fueled a lot of like where I'm at today. Obviously family and friends and like support from them. But all of this was like unplanned. And then being a founder, like, entrepreneur and having your own thing, like my grandfather did his own thing. But I never thought I would be in that place either. Sorry, my cat is just going to be
I love it. A random tail coming out of your face.
Yep. It's definitely planned.
There you go. Work from home, guys.
Yep, there it is. And so, it was a kind of, I've always read articles of folks, starting their own thing and how how it's gratifying and how, you know, putting yourself out there is important. But then actually doing that all on your own is like a whole different story. Like, I don't think people talk enough about like the challenge of running your own startup or your own product idea. Like taking it from end to end is like way different than it being on a Notion document as like a bullet point.
Yeah.
You know, and
So what would you say? What would you say some of those things are, or what were the ones that you faced?
Yeah. So for me, the biggest challenges have been the balance. So like, how do I balance a full-time job and then this other thing that I really care about, succeeding, right? And then on top of that, not having funds. I think with NoCode, like we were talking about before, like you don't have to have, you know, $1,000 to launch your product. You can have probably like 20, right? But as you start developing it more, right, you might get to a point where you do have to scale. And so preparing for that, I'm not prepared for that right now. So it's like these things that people I don't think I've read enough about. Also, I think for me, you know, being a minority already puts me at like a disadvantage, right? So as a woman, I also have a fear, right? A fear of like rejection or criticism and all of that. So I want to shy away from my work and not show it. So I had to really like train myself, my cat, I had to train myself to not have that mindset and sort of like just take that little risk, get on that phone call, do something like this, right? Like things that are totally out of my comfort zone, because I know like it's not only helping me as a person grow, but it's like allowing me to share my story, whatever that story is, with like one other person. And if it can help somebody who's sitting like at their computer with a list of ideas like I have always had, and actually like put it to action, like that's super awesome. So that's why I kind of like try to put myself out there more.
Yeah.
But it's
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And it's scary, right? Like we all have these things that go through our minds. Like our mind is constantly feeding us information. And usually a lot of that information, specifically with some of the things that you're put through with society, and very specifically actually like, and more so as a woman, more so as a minority, like it creates these automatic loops of self-doubt. And it's not just it's basically everyone has these, right? But I think for me, one of the breakthroughs with regard to that was just like being able to identify that they're happening when they're happening.
Yeah.
Because if not, you're literally just on this like, you're just being carried away or reacting to these sort of these things that are coming to you, and they make you feel emotion, and then you feel like you have to. So I'm a huge, like, I love what you're talking about right now, because I think that that's something that as a founder, you're constantly fighting your own self-doubt. You're like, they say you're your own worst enemy. You literally are. You absolutely, there's no one else who's doubting you more than you are.
Yep.
You know?
And I didn't, if I give an example, like I almost didn't launch Cafecito. Back in the fall, I saw a competitor come up and I'm like, oh no, like I can't launch my thing anymore. And that had been my story for the past like 3 years. Like I have an idea, somebody else is already doing it. Like, why would anybody want to come to my product? And so somebody just said like, that's fine. Like they validated the market for you. And that was like the best piece of advice I could have gotten at that time, because if not, I would have just like said, oh, well, like, this other company's doing a similar concept that I have, bring people together through matching, right? But I knew that I would be super sad if I didn't put it out there, and having that little push, that little voice in your ear say like, no, like just do it, like just see what happens. Like that was definitely it encouraged me to where I am today right now, essentially.
And it's much lower risk, specifically when you're working with like NoCode.
Exactly.
Because of the time that you have to spend is way smaller. The investment is way smaller. And so, no, I love that. I think that that's probably what's holding most people back, is like these misconceptions that, you have to leave your full-time job. Like, absolutely not. Yeah. Like if you want to build a business, I'm not saying you can build a $10 million business while having a really high intensity day job, but it's a transition, right? And most of the first steps are really about going out there, understanding. It's like a slower process, the beginning of building something, until you really reach that market fit and you start having your business model really create recurring revenue. And at that point you can be like, okay, great. Like now it's a time where you're basically lowering the risk. We all want to have lower risk, but when you start building on the side, you're lowering the risk, and you also are able to build what it is that you're looking to do. And that's, I think, one of the saddest things for me when I was sort of seeing so many founders go through the process of like, is the fact that a lot of people were spending so much time and money on the wrong things. But the worst thing is that if something didn't work out, they were losing the belief in themselves that they could actually ever be their own boss or start their own project again. And I think that's a really important thing to like just. I'm not saying never give up, because sometimes like there are just things you have to look at the results in the face. But I don't know, like.
So I agree with you there. I think the thing that is missing for a lot of us is like when our initial idea, which is like our baby, right? Like this idea that we want to see succeed, when that gets like shut down in any way, like we shut down, right, with the idea. So what I would recommend folks to do, like NoCode is a great way to start because low cost and you can put it out there. But the good thing about that is you also have control over your whole entire system. So you can literally make a change in an hour after you get like some feedback from a customer, if you'd like you're not, it's not like a set in stone thing. So with Cafecito, I think of that too. I'm like, I am flexible with wherever this idea takes me, as long as it's meeting its core concept of like bringing people together in the remote workspace. Like that is what I'm trying to do with this. And if that idea needs to change tomorrow because the market needs something else, like that is what I'll do. Obviously with like, there's more to that too, but it's not just that simple. But like at the end of the day, like if you show your idea to somebody and they say, no, I don't want that, or, I'm already using something else, like, don't just, end the call, but instead like ask those questions of like, tell me about that, or why is it that you like this product more? Like, what is it meaning for you? And there's no reason why you can't take your idea and just pivot a tiny bit. Like, I think that's a thing that we forget to do because it's, again, our baby idea, being shut down. But it's like sometimes you just pivot and you might just hit that sweet spot and now you have success in some way, right? So
I love that, and that's literally the methodology that I always preach, because it's like falling in love with your idea is one of the most dangerous things. I think that you have to remain kind of loyal to your vision, and it seems like what you've done is like, you have a vision of what you believe. But also it's about looking at things as you go along and being like, oh, well, I thought this feature might have been so important, but actually it wasn't something that interested people so much, or they said they were interested, but they didn't actually use it in that way. Right. So I think that like, that's what's interesting, like, and that's where entrepreneurs, it's about being problem solving and about figuring out what the next experiment is so that you can get closer to that thing. And the more you, as you mentioned, fall in love with the idea and you're like, I know exactly what it is and this is what I'm building, like the more that you're actually just building something for yourself. And usually you're trying to, satisfy either customers or just users, as if it's something for free or if you're not monetizing it yet. And I think that that's a place that we have a hard time with, because it's like we're as humans, we're a bit stubborn, And we want to be right? Yeah, exactly. Like our society has trained us to want to always be right. But the ability to kind of build empathy with the people that are using the thing is what's ultimately going to drive you. And listen, if someone tells you they don't like what you're doing, there's a couple different things. They might partly be right. And in that case, what you said is absolutely correct. Find out what specifically. And it might not be the right customer that you're targeting. So you might just not be putting the right product in front of the right customer. And that's, and when they talk about product market fit, it's this idea of like, you have a product, which is just, a set of features. You have a market, which is a specific individual, a subset of people. And sometimes you just have to try to find the right thing. And so you can either adapt the product or you can target a new audience, and you can make all these tests. And eventually you'll find a segment that falls perfectly in line with these features. And if in between you have that business model, then you have a business, right? And of course, then you have other stuff moving forward. But no, that's so cool. Like, I think that what you've done with Cafecito is just so cool, because like your mentality behind it. So tell us about like, because you're also in product development, and when you do like product development is basically when you are kind of leading the 360 realm, like the entire project. You're managing designers, developers, different people. Tell us about like. And I know, like, you might tell me there's not much, But what are some of the things that you were able to apply in your own journey using NoCode from what you already knew in product development?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of what I do has been just birthed out of me being in product. So things like user research, right? Before product, why is it needed? But like as a product manager, now I know why it's needed. You don't want to build something that nobody wants. You also want to make sure your experience for your product is a good one because you want to retain people and engage people throughout the whole time. So I think that was a huge bucket that I definitely applied to when I was building out with NoCode too. It's like Webflow is great. We can essentially build an onboarding process pretty easily by just using a tool like that. So the user experience part was huge. Definitely applied to everything I do with NoCode development. And on top of that, I think it was a lot of like the marketing, like value piece. So a big part of product management is knowing what your value proposition is. Like, why are you different? But also, why should I even use what you have in front of me? Like, why is your solution something that would benefit me? Why should I take the time to click on sign up now? Right. So it's literally like a sentence that's supposed to encapsulate like what your product does and hopefully convert this person to sign up. So it's something that's drilled into you as a product manager. Is just like, what is the value? Like if you're building a feature with your team, why are we doing this? Like, what is this going to bring to our customers? So that thinking is like 100% applied into everything I do with any project that I build using NoCode tools, not just Cafecito, but anything that I try to put out there is like, I go through that thinking, that same workflow.
I love that.
And it's like a habit thing at this point. There's obviously things that I'm not perfect at, like monetization and marketing, like weak points of mine, but it allows you to have room for improvement, which I think is important as well. Like you don't want to know everything, right? Because then I don't know if you'd be growing at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. I think that what you're touching on is really interesting because like figuring out that's where like no code is not enough, right? Like you need to also you need to understand how to build businesses, right? Mm-hmm. So like when we talk about value proposition, it's really about understanding what makes that specific customer tick, right? So you might be saying all the same things, but sometimes the way you say something attracts people more to what you're doing than another way, right? And that's also something that you're going to test through your product. That's so cool. Yeah, I actually, that's interesting because that's absolutely the way that we like do it in our program. And it's just to say like the product, even if you had the whole product built, and that's probably a thing that people make the mistake of, is like they spend so much time trying to build the thing and not enough time trying to acquire the customers, build the relationships that you need around that to turn that product into a business, a monetizable sort of software startup, right? Yeah. And so, yeah, there's definitely like that two-sided thing. So what is some of the advice that you would have for like first-time entrepreneurs from your own experiences?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in terms of advice, I don't want to say anything corny or, things that you could find online.
Believe in yourself.
Right? Yeah, pretty much. No, well, yes, but also know when you're wrong and like you need to kind of step off, that as well. But I think a good piece of advice, and I think I've already said it multiple times, is, if you have this idea that you're kind of stirring in your head and you've been stirring in your head for months or weeks, or you can't go to sleep because this idea keeps like, it's like, oh, I could do this and I could target these people and I could build up this feature. Like there is something there. And I would encourage you to explore that. It can be through something easy, like talking to a friend about it and seeing what they think. It could be bringing it up to your coworker and seeing if, maybe they're a customer that you could potentially have in the future. Or, actually putting it out there and using, tutorials. There's so many resources online that they teach you how to use a no-code tool, just like yours. So like using these resources to your advantage, because some of them are at a low cost to entry, or they're free, or they have really good instructors behind them. So putting that idea in front of a small group of people and just getting that initial feedback, like that's going to satisfy this like need that you have on this idea. And so if I could recommend anything, it's just like believing in yourself, yes, and also just taking that first little step. It doesn't have to be a huge one, but even if it's just a small 1-inch step towards like where you're trying to go, it definitely helps. And being scared is fine. Like I'm scared every day when I try new things with Cafecito. Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. So it's a total normal feeling. I think if you're not scared, I don't know. Does that
You
make
may
it
be
like
a sociopath, right?
yeah,
Is
yeah, that sounds right. So having fear is normal. Like talk about the fear, if anything. Like
Yeah.
let it be out there.
And we were kind of talking about this quickly, but like definitely like the human side that's coming out from in the business world right now is something that's very refreshing. And I think that although we're going through very like difficult times, I think one thing that's happening through these times is that people are being more human, right? So we're jumping on these Zoom calls where we're having conversations with other company members, and we're wearing a T-shirt instead of a tie, or all these kind of things. I think it's
your cat in the background just like
exactly
bothering
your cat's tail is just caressing the side of your face.
Exactly, yeah.
But that's really refreshing. I think that for a long time, like we and for me, I mean, I was I've worked in Europe as well, and I think that like the American mentality of like work-life balance, or like kind of like being a bit more yourself, is a bit more presence. The management style is also a little bit different. I think that's shifting as well in all these countries. So I wouldn't bash anything. We're all progressing, but it's really good to see people who can actually be themselves at work, right? And increasingly, like people who have felt isolated, specifically kind of minorities and stuff like that, like who now feel like a little bit more like they can be themselves, like. Because that, in the end of the day, it's like we all have to believe that we have something to give here, right? And that's where I encourage people to kind of take action with their ideas. It's because, listen, even if this is not like the best idea, even if it doesn't end up being a massive business, it's going to prove to you that that you can learn things, and that you can learn things quickly, you can apply them, and you can do stuff that you never thought that you were capable of, which actually unleashes the bigger thing, which is like the confidence that allows you to then go on to take on bigger challenges, if that's something that you're interested in.
Yeah. And I think it's I think a big thing that's helped me too is like sometimes using what you learn through your job, for example, like it might seem like menial tasks that you're doing, but you're getting experience in some way. And I think the moment that you apply that to like a side project, you're essentially amplifying that skill even more, right? Like I launched small little projects throughout these past 3 years as a product manager. And that's all helped me today, right? So if I hadn't done that, I'd be like at square one right now. But like, even if it's like an hour a week of like, oh, I'm going to build this small thing, or I'm going to do some research on, maybe how this person built, I don't know, how Facebook was built or something, like doing those small little bits of research over time, like adds up. Like all of that is work you're investing into yourself. So if you're doing that today, like you are doing something, right? It's just a matter of like, now it's like this next bigger step of like putting your own thing out there, over reading what other people are doing. Yeah. And that was like a huge like shift in my thinking too. It's like, oh, so this is how how it feels like to be under pressure. And, but at the same time, like I have a lot of like, I'm super grateful that I can do this and have the time to do it. Right. Like I am definitely 100% grateful. If I could just have reached one person with Cafecito, I would have been, it's kind of like your similar philosophy. Like I would have been happy. Thankfully it's more, which is really, really cool. But I think it's just getting out there and putting the motion in gets you that experience that you will have for that next big thing. Right.
I love that. That whole concept. I think that people, we're definitely in a generation and also in a world which is sort of all based around instant gratification. And I think it was like Steve Jobs who said, like, you only see the path making sense. You only connect the dots looking backwards, right? Yeah. But every little effort that you put in, that you don't get that instant, like, oh, that was so good, you're so amazing. Yeah. But along the way is driving you towards the right direction, like, and that continual pursuit is kind of like what ends up bringing you to the place you were looking to go, right? And I think it's kind of funny because it's kind of sad that we're in this instant gratification, and it's because, through technology, through all these different things, we've also been a little bit chemically manipulated in the sense that, little, like when you get a notification, you get a little dopamine rush,
Yeah.
And so I think that it's important for people to, and have you ever heard of the marshmallow test?
Yes. Yeah. With the kids. Yeah.
Exactly. Where they put like, they're like, you can have one marshmallow now, or you can wait and you can have two marshmallows. And just, I think that ability for humans to kind of change and to be like, you know what, I'm going to put an effort into something that doesn't necessarily bring me direct results or direct positive feedback, but that I know is in a direction that I'm interested in, or that feeds something that brings me passion. It ultimately is what brings you to success. And so it's so funny because it's counterintuitive.
Yeah, it is. But I think more people are having that way of thinking now, which is really, really neat. It's like we're becoming a little bit more aware that we don't need, an Instagram, like a like on our Instagram picture to make it worthwhile to post on Instagram, right? So I think we're getting there. And it's cool to see when I talk to people, I see that like change, which is really neat. It's like the little flicker of, oh, okay, I'm meeting somebody else who has that same line of thinking that they don't need to have everything right now, that it's going to take time, that it's not an overnight success, right? Like these things that we have been fed that it is instant, but then when you're actually doing it, you then realize that it's totally not. So it's really cool to see that slow progression towards realizing and accepting that it's going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of more work to get to that point.
Yeah. So you obviously have a real badass mindset.
I try.
Do you have any tips that, like, I mean, are there things that you've done in your life, or I don't know, like, I don't know, like, like for me, I don't know, I've done weird things like cold showers, or like I changed my diet. Like, are there things like that like, do you have any tips with regard to that have kind of helped you? It might be meditation, it might be exercise, it might be, there's so many things. Like, have any of those worked for you? Has anything, any advice on that?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's been many things, but I think the two things that pop to my head right now, one, it's every morning just writing down like what are those important things that I'm going to get done today, and I sort of split it up into two buckets. It's like work stuff, and then also like what am I doing outside of work. And so I've always been like that. Like I don't want my life to revolve around my day job, because I think at the end of the day, there's more to us than like a career. Like we can bring so much more to the table, right? So I think for me, it's always been super important to explore everything outside of work. And so having that structure in your morning, that's just going to be like, hey, Irma, from these hours, you're going to be working, but like after work, you're going to spend an hour on this thing that can bring you a little bit closer to this bigger goal that you have. So that's been a huge, huge helper for me. And then I think secondly from that has been just like meeting new people. And I do that through many ways, but getting those perspectives from people that I would have never met otherwise, because we have access to like Twitter and Reddit and Slack groups, right? Like it's giving me so much access to just have the confidence to just reach out to somebody and say, hey, like I really love what you're doing. I'd love to talk more about remote work. And like, I'm not trying to get anything from them. I'm just literally trying to have a conversation with somebody that I think I would get along with, because we have this shared thread. And that's helped me a ton in growing, and also just getting those new perspectives, which then I learn, right? I learn myself. I'm also hopefully teaching others, but I'm growing essentially every time I hop on a call with a new person. So I would say those are the two biggest things that I do till this day that have helped me the most.
That's so cool. And so for that personal connection side of things, you definitely have Cafecito, which is also in line with that.
Yeah, plug.
So,
yeah.
So, I mean, before we finish this interview, can you tell people kind of where they can find you? Maybe tell them where they can find out a little bit more about Cafecito.
For sure. So Cafecito, you can sign up. Actually, we're in early beta right now, so it's free to use at the moment. And so you can sign up by going to meetcafecito.com. Super simple. You just enter your email and we'll ask you to fill out a profile, and then you can get started from there. And then you can sign up every week to actually join a coffee break with somebody from all over the world. So it's a really neat experience. And to find me, if you ever want to talk, I'm happy to chat about remote work or just like launching your own thing for the first time. I'm still learning, but happy to share things that I've faced along the way. You can reach me on Twitter. It's just @_just Irma.
Very cool. I love that. Well, I think you have such a great attitude towards everything that you're doing. I love this idea that you're preaching for people to kind of, because I think a lot of people who are in full-time jobs, they're unhappy because they don't see a way out. And I think that they don't think that they can actually start taking actions that will provide them with a path that allows them to do things that they might want to do, whether that's leaving their job eventually or not.
Right.
Some of those may be personal. It's like, but I think that definitely adding energy to those parts of your life is super important, especially when you feel a bit stuck.
100%.
So thanks so much for sort of being the example and really doing that yourself, not just talking about it, but going out and actually doing it. I think the story is really inspiring for a lot of people out there, and
Awesome.
and I appreciate you joining the LinkedIn Live interview.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Super great being here.
Absolutely. And thanks for everyone who watched as well. I appreciate you guys watching. I love your comments. Keep them coming. Irma, thanks so much again, and have a great day.
Awesome. You too. See ya.
Take care.